administrators and teachers in that room that day, that this is not something that you do overnight. You don't make this decision and the next day you have a new report card. Steve and Trish and I were like, okay, we haven't made a change in a report card in Millstone in 8 years. And look at all the changes we have made in our classroom. We have gotten new standards in math and language arts. We've starting new standards with the Next Gen Science standards. We're making a ton of changes in science. 6 through 8 are changing for September, and we're already starting to make the K-5 changes that are necessary for the following year. We have made changes in our related arts with all the upcoming and the changes that have been made in their core content standards. So why haven't we changed our report card yet? 8 years is a really long time. The only change we made in 8 years was when we split this building. When we split the building and we left 5th grade at the elementary school, we changed the 5th grade report card so it matched 3rd and 4th. So that's a really long time. So that's why this change is being made. When we pass out the new report card to you, we just are giving you a sample of 2nd grade. You'll see that it really does not look that different. But what a standards-based, can you just change the slide real quick, Suzanne? What the standards-based report card does is gives you the key standards for each subject area that we are focusing on. So what our committee did, Trish, Steve, and I had gone through the teachers and we had asked for representatives from the elementary and the primary school. So we ended up with 3 teachers at the beginning, grade level teachers and specialists for our committee. So there were about 8 to 10 of us on the committee from the start. As we started to create the report card, we started pulling in other grade level teachers. So we made sure between grades K to 5, we had teachers from all grade levels helping us build this report card. And we're going to show you samples as we go through these slides. We had language arts people, we had math people, we had related arts teachers. Everyone was working on what they thought were the key standards from each of their subject areas. Looking at the standards from New Jersey that they thought had to be on this report card. Not just making up their own phrases or the wording that they thought was right for their subject area, but looking at wording from the actual standards for New Jersey. So those were the things that we chose. So when you look at the sample that we give you tonight, that's where those phrasings are going to come from the actual standards. When we give you the how this is going to be, how your students will be scored for each standard, it's going to give you levels of proficiency, which Suzanne and Trish will explain to you. You're going to be able to see their progress throughout the year, and it's going to reflect their achievement toward the mastery of the standard for the grade level that they're in. That's what we're looking at. We want to know that our children are working at grade level. Are they meeting the standard for their grade level? Are they exceeding it? When you had if you have children in grade 3 through 8, you had their PARCC scores. And I know we were all a little nervous. How many of you have students in grade 3 through 8? So when you had their PARCC scores, you had a level 1 through 5. A level 5 told you that your child is exceeding grade level expectations. A level 4 told you they were meeting them, and a level 3 told you they were approaching them. We're going to give you something similar. It's going to be a level 1, 2, 3, or 4. A 4 would mean that your child is exceeding expectations for the grade level. Again, Trish and Suzanne are going to explain that to you tonight. But that's how they will be scored. It's a little different than what you have seen in K2, okay? So let's go to the next slide.
So the question may be why, enhance the report card at this time, and I think, Karen spoke to the reality that we've shifted teaching and learning and curriculum several years ago, probably upwards of 4 or 5 years ago in the district, and we haven't shifted our report card to best value what kids know and understand and can do when grounded in the new standards and in the new curriculum. We believe that this report card will give us a better, more comprehensive picture of what kids can do, and it's going to give you a better picture of your learner. If we think about the standards, they're highly rigorous. They expect our students to be critical thinkers, apply what they're learning in the classroom, and they give us very clear guidelines of what kids need to be able to do and understand at the end of the grade level. So working backwards from there, we're able to work with teachers to calibrate and have really critical conversations around if our child needs to be here at the end of third grade in reading, in writing, in math, in science, in social studies, and our related arts, then what does that look like at certain benchmarks or times throughout the year? And moving to a standards-based report card allows all of us as a community to set those indicators for different parts of the year, and so we can keep track of progress. And so that's fundamentally probably the biggest reason for the shift, so that we're really truly now communicating the changes that have happened in the classroom with teaching and learning in terms of student performance. Again, teachers are working behind the scenes, so to speak, to calibrate and to have critical conversations about those standards. And then how do we identify those behaviors of learning, those attributes of the learner at different parts throughout the year. And that's how we're going to design a report card system that's going to allow us to track progress across the year. So we'll sort of move into the academic portion of how we assess students. So Ms. Barry spoke a little bit about the scale that we're going to use. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale as opposed to sort of that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale that we see on the PARCC
Or as
assessment.
opposed to what you currently have, if you have a child in the primary school right now, you have a D and P and E and N, which is lettering similar to the numbers.
And the wording of this, as you can see, that 3 is really an indicator for us as families and for us as educators and as teachers that your child is doing what's expected at that moment in time and that they're on their progression to meeting that standard at the end of the school year. And again, 2 is a completely acceptable place to be throughout the year because we're honoring kids where they are. We're growing towards that 3, we're even growing beyond that 3 to that 4, but we're constantly keeping a measure or a check on how kids are growing on their own learning continuum, and that's really the basis of a standards-based report card. So the scale shifts slightly from what we're used to, but it's giving you a really tight picture of what your student is doing against those standards that, you know, sort of norm our grade level work. Do we want to do questions?
Let me just explain, we had readjusted the math over and over again because we had broken up the math at first, and this is why it was so nice to be working with so many teachers. We pulled teachers in that we felt, at the beginning we had the initial committee, and then we started pulling in teachers that were, like Mrs. Murin is teaching just math right now. So we were like, let's pull Mrs. Murin in, and when we're working on the math portion, so Mrs. Murin came in, and I believe maybe Mrs. Myrick and Mrs. Vitro came in, and we worked on the math portion. Well, we designed the math portion, and then we presented it to all the grade level teachers. And the grade level teachers, one at a time, sat and looked at it, and they said, I don't think we can fill out that math portion the first trimester without having a lot of sections that say NA,
Do you
not at
recall
this
in your
time.
report cards, you get like little asterisks that says not at this time because they're not subtracting in the beginning of, let's say, first grade. So that's what Karen's
Right,
referring
so we pulled the math section back, we got those initial teachers back together and we said, we need to revisit this because we're not handing out a report card that has NA for all these math sections. Let's come up with different wording from the standards where we can now design a rubric where we're looking at those skills that they do in the first trimester, and we can give these parents and these
Real
kids
indicators.
real indicators of how their child is doing with those skills. So we're going to show you what that looks like in a couple of minutes, but we want to give you feedback every time we give you a report on your child, not NA. So that's why, you know, working with these teachers and just going back and forth between the committee and the grade level was important during this time.
So in addition to what you'll see academically, you're also going to see, which is quite important, is the successful learner and the characteristics of what that looks like. So you may know it as work behaviors, right, or habits in class, and it's that right-hand side of your current K-1-2 report card where it speaks to, you know, are they on task, are they, you know, finishing assignments, are they getting along with others, are they taking direction, that sort of thing. So we'll be grading that similarly of what you, strike that part, of what you now have,
That's what
and you'll
one.
see three letters. You'll see a C for consistently, O for occasionally, and N for needs improvement in these areas. So we put a lot of hard work and a lot of conversation into, well, really, what does a child need to exist in a K-3 arena right now? What does that look like? And a lot is expected of them, but again, this is something that they grow with. So we were also consistent when we took it across K through 3. So that in kindergarten, it may look a little different than what we expect of a first grader, what we expect of a second grader, and eventually a third grader. But this is some of the language you will see for their work skills versus their social skills. So you'll see something as important as on the last one. We were very careful with our wording on that one. Use the strategies to problem solve, right? So that looks very different in preschool, because let's not forget I've got preschool here, right? Very different preschool kindergarten than it does in third grade. In kindergarten, problem solving might be, packing up their things or not being able to get out of the room on time. They can't do that on their own. They're not asking for help. A simple raise of a hand, I need help packing my bag, versus a third grader, maybe a social interaction they're having with someone to solve that issue. So you will see two types of grading on your report card. You will see the academic 1, 2, 3, 4, and you will see these grades.
Can I just put a disclaimer here that some of this might be a little different for second or third grade. I pulled some of these samples off of different report
But where
cards.
we could keep the language consistent, we did. So as a parent, if you've got 2 children in your home, and you've got a kindergartner and you've got a second grader, you're going over report cards, it can be different with
Yeah.
your language,
Yeah.
different with your language, so. I think at this time, we thought it might be best if we actually went ahead and, distributed the current report card to you. So you can see, this is a current, I believe, second grade report card. We want you to take a look. How many of you have had a report card so far? Like, have you ever seen the K-1-2 report card? Yes? So I'm going to give you a second grade report card.
But this goes up to 50. Yeah, 5.
Sure.
Are we getting hard copies of, because I know we moved this into the district in February.
Hard copies
I
of
have not
this?
seen a report card for my kids yet, only on PowerSchool, a hard copy.
What grade are you in?
My daughter's in 5th and my son's in
You get your
11th.
hard copies at the end of the year.
The end
for
of
your
the school year,
building.
K
Then we'll have
one
all the
paper
grades.
cards.
Until then, it's all on paper.
I like the paper so much better than computer. I wish
Current?
they always got the paper.
I like the paper. And then I just wanted to qualify, you're getting a second copy, which is what the draft of the new second grade and enhanced report card will look like, but we want you to be able to hold them both, because while you take a look at this old report card, K through 2 report cards, I think you're already used to seeing skills that are broken down. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see reading, you'll see writing. So you're used to seeing the area itself broken down into pieces and graded with a D, a P, an E, or an N. That is not something you will have seen in, like, let's say, 4th or 5th. In 4th or 5th, you're just getting a grade. It wasn't broken down. The new report cards that you're getting, if you take a look, is the new breakdown. And you'll see that Karen will address to you when you'll receive them and what kind of communication you'll get.
We have extra.
And if you have a pen, you can turn
Are we
that
short any on
draft over and write, there will be a narrative section on that new report card.
Yes.
I forgot to let the technology director know that he should include that on my draft. There will be a narrative
I
section
feel
on
very
there.
strongly, especially as a K-2 building, that lots of your good stuff comes in that comment area, right? So I hope that you see that when your report cards come home, that those teachers know your children. You often get paragraphs about what kind of learner you have at home, how to support, and the great things that they're doing, so that will continue.
Is that a requirement?
As opposed,
That's a requirement. The
I can
teachers are
speak for my
required.
K-2 building, yes.
Just curious.
That was a big discussion during the changing of this report card, and I really didn't let it came up, and yes, there is a narrative.
Yeah.
There will be a narrative on this new report card. It is, I think, the most important thing, besides just putting a rating on each section. Yes, there is a narrative. We need to give a little bit more explanation than just a number. So yes, we feel very strongly about the standards that were chosen underneath each subject area, but the narrative is very important to also include. So another big change that you will see here is that we are moving from marking periods to trimesters. This allows the teachers for more time to assess your child. We will show you how we're going to be calibrating behind the scenes with rubrics for every single line on that report card. moving forward, starting in September. We'll show you that in a second. But I will give you dates in September in the back to school packet, but we will be having our trimesters ending at the beginning of December, at some point in March and at the end of June.
Your
So,
conference dates still stand.
Yep,
So you still have
conference date will
conferences
be
in
the
November,
same.
and then your check-ins in February if necessary.
Now, this is important. Remember, we are just changing the K3 for this September, only because K2 is used to getting that report card that you already have in your hand, which is very similar to what they've been getting. No grades, just those indicators. Grades 3 and 4 students have already been getting a letter grade. We're not going to take that away from them and all of a sudden stop giving them grades. So we're going to let the students are going to grandfather out of the grades. So if you look on the bottom of here, grade 4 students, so when our 3rd graders move up, we'll bring this into 4th grade the following year and 5th grade the following year after that. Now, the big question will be at the end of this discussion, what happens with things like advanced math placement? What happens when our students get to middle school, things like that? Those discussions have already started with what we're going to do with those issues, okay? So the administration has already decided, actually, I shouldn't say decided. The administration has already started discussing those things. Just know that we are already in the planning phases of how we're going to make those transitions, okay? The middle school already has a grading committee going about talking about their grades and taking things like behaviors out of their grades. So Dr. Huss would have loved to join us tonight. He could not. He was going to come this morning. Good thing he didn't because we had no audience this morning. It was just the 3 of us here. So,
Sorry, you're all here now.
but, yeah,
I didn't stutter over
thank
my
you for
words
coming
this
because
morning.
this is
You missed it.
yeah, we were flawless this morning.
Yeah, so the feedback is very positive.
Mr. Fetter did try getting us to present for him and we said no. So, the discussion on grading as a whole, K8 has already started and we will be solving those transition issues as we go. But, Dr. Huss, we have gotten into this conversation because we know it is a big transition already from 5th to 6th grade, so we will be having those discussions.
All right.
So, here we go.
All right, so you'll see on your report card that you have an area for language arts literacy, and you've got reading, writing, listening, and speaking, which are all the standards that we address. So you'll see something such as this. You'll see that your bullets. These are your indicators, and behind all of these things. So that's what we currently have now, right? So if you've got a current K1-2 student, you're used to seeing this, and you've got your D's, your P's, your E's, your N's. What we're looking to do is behind this, make sure that teachers are supported and you as families have answers to your questions. What makes a D? What makes a P, right? So essentially what makes a 3, what makes a 4, so that we can build consistency between classrooms. We want to make sure that Mrs. Smith is grading the same as Mrs. Jones, and it's not based on someone's subjectivity, right? Or based on which classroom your child is in. So behind the report card, what you have, and I'm showing you a sample, is what's essentially a rubric. So any of you that have a 3rd, 4th, 5th grade student, or quite possibly a 2nd grade student, their writing is always scored with a rubric. So the kids know whatever piece they're writing, there is a like a behind the scenes paper that their teacher is scoring. Did I use my punctuation? I get maybe a 4 for that. Did I have a good lead? I get maybe a 3 for that. Did I include 5 paragraphs? So it's all scored, tallied, and that's how your students are getting grades on a writing piece. This is something so that you can see that we are developing and have, I would say, probably about 85–90% done at this point, because we had to flesh these out for this, because you have to make sure you can support this. The teachers have, in order to grade students, to make sure it's consistent. So you'll see something such as the first one, it's tough to see on the whiteboard, but kindergarten sample uses pictures and words to express ideas. So we all know if we've had a kindergartner, they start off first with lots of pictures, right? And they're very proud of their labeling. So they draw like a mush, and like it says airplane, you're like, of course that's an airplane. I mean, I knew that was an airplane. But they've got their mush, right? And then they move on to some words to explain their airplane. I see an airplane, or I like airplanes. And then they move on even further to describe the airplane. I went on an airplane, I took a trip with grandma, things like that. So what that rubric does is it bumps you up in your different steps, not only a 1, 2, 3, or 4, but across your school year. What is it like for a beginning writer, a middle of the year writer, and an end of the year writer? Again, consistency amongst grade levels, so it's not just Mrs. So-and-so who really likes Johnny and knows he's trying, right? You're gonna get that objective grade. Same thing for something such as forms letters and numerals correctly. Something like this comes with an easy score. In other words, if you have 6 to 13 uppercase letters, if you have 14 to 26 uppercase letters. Again, it's really important for us to be consistent in our grading so that we can give you a clear picture of where your child falls in that continuum. Are they on grade level, are they exceeding it, or are they just, meeting it or having any issues for things that we need to address as a staff?
And you're going to see that math works in a similar fashion. Again, everything that's on the report card is grounded in the standards. So in that math portion of the report card, you can sort of see those bigger, broader categories, those indicators, understands, applies, concepts. That really is sort of with the language we chose to avoid a lot of that NA on the report card, because these concepts just are going to be tied to the particular mathematical standards that we're working at any given time across the school year. We also know and value the importance of automaticity with our facts. We know that's critical in terms of moving forward and applying our mathematical understanding to more complex problems. We want our kids to be automatic. We want them to know their facts in the same way they know their name, right? It should be fairly automatic. Most days I know my name rather automatically. Most days.
And by the way, this is second grade, so don't panic. This is an extension of the kindergarten block.
Yeah. And obviously, they're problem-solving strategies. What I want to show you is that rubric, that second grade sample of a rubric for math. It's laid out a little differently because of that first strand on the report card, that if you go back and you look, it's that understands the concepts. And again, these are your content focus. So in second grade, in the beginning of the year, when we look at that understands and applies concepts, kids should be able to identify odds and evens. Kids should be able to do any of those things sort of listed in this portion of the rubric. Again, that helps us know that we're on track to meeting that end of year standard. So teachers, again, this report card committee really had to sort of unpack the standards. That's critical, weighty work for teachers. We had to sort of read closely and say, what do these standards really mean? What evidence in student performance indicates that a student has an understanding of that standard, and then unpack it even further and go backwards so that we end up with a true progression of learning across the year and hopefully a more comprehensive picture of your student.
Right. And those math standards will be broken up by trimester also. Like the language arts, they're just going to be presented a little bit differently.
So a question that always comes up with standards-based grading is, how do we value and honor the progress that maybe some of our identified students or our identified learners are making? And I think it's important to sort of note, and there's a slide in here later, that for any learner, whether they're identified or not, the report card never replaces effective parent communication. And so in conjunction with the report card, we're still going to be sending home progress reports and updates on any identified student, how they're growing against their individualized education plan, their specific goals and objectives in those plans. But then alongside, you're going to get a sort of a look of how your student is progressing or achieving against those grade level standards. So again, giving you a very comprehensive picture about how they're growing as an individual learner, and then what does that sort of mean when we sort of put it next to grade level standards at that time. So we'll continue to work closely with Mrs. Hall, with our special education teachers who have also had sort of a seat at the table when it comes to the report card for how to value and honor really the work of our students who are identified for special services while still communicating the importance of how they're performing against the standard. As parents, we need both pieces of information, and we understand that. I think another thing that's important to sort of note here is, again, that comment feature is going to be essential on this report card. We value, for all learners, being able to say, we know they're approaching the standard, and here's sort of the next step. Here's how we can partner between home and school to make sure that they're continuing to make progress. Again, here's how we see that they're exceeding that standard. Here's some specifics, here's some strategies. So again, those comments are important here.
I believe that is our next slide. It's just constant communication between home and school. And when we brought this up to the teachers, we met with our committee one more time, our initial committee last week, and we brought up the idea of communication again, and they looked at me and they're like, we're K-5 teachers. It is our, you know, our job to communicate with parents all the time, not just at report card time. And I believe I shared my same view with the board when I was asked the question. When I was a middle school principal, it's not just report card time. I expected my teachers to communicate if there was one worry about a child. Power School is not your answer.
You can't find
It
out at that time,
is-
you need to know.
It is a phone call to a parent. It's constant communication. It's not the computer. It's not an email. It is calling a parent and reaching out if you have a concern and communicating with them all the time. So switching to the trimester should not be a change in that communication. And if I didn't share before, even though 4th and 5th grade students will continue to get that same report card they have gotten, we will make that change to the trimester for them, only because we don't want to confuse the when the report card's coming out and when it's going home and who's getting what and when the portal's closing and when it's opening for everybody. It just, to avoid confusion.
You wanna be able to line them all up and say, how did you all do?
Right.
You
It
don't
would
wanna
just be
excuse
too
someone, you're in
crazy
2
to keep-
weeks, you're out.
to keep it on different schedules, so that will be the change for 4th and 5th grade. We'll have trimesters, but they will still get their same report card that they have in the past years. So,
So, yeah, so these are the group of people that helped us, but I have to say it was pretty much everybody because everyone's opinion is important. And it's one of those things where once we had the draft out, we shared it with every teacher and said, what on here is something that you don't feel you would be able to assess, right? Is there something on here that you couldn't call, Mrs. Bielo and say, listen, this is where your students sit. So they really had to take that last look at it. I said, because we're gonna roll this out, are you able to grade the kids in this fashion? And like I said, for K2, this is not much of a switch for them. This is what we've been doing. And the kids who are going from 2nd to 3rd, this is what they're used to.
right.
Yeah.
And I think for our grade 3 teachers, the feedback that, we've received working with them in team meeting, grade level meetings, and even, through the committee work, is that this really honors the way they've been teaching. It's honoring that shift again in teaching and learning, that shift in the standards. They feel like they're better able to give more accurate information because now, we're assessing in the same way that we're sort of designing instruction.
Right.
Okay. So this is the part, if you have any questions, you ask Karen. Does anybody have any questions you think maybe almost like for the